also a professor in Asian American Studies, Comparative Literature, and Women's Studies.
And you are the author of?
I am the author of a new book, Gene, co-authored with my dear friend, Shinhee Han, who is a New York-based psychotherapist. It's called Racial Melancholia, Racial Dissociation, on the social and psychic lives of Asian Americans.
Damn, David Ng is doing all the things. He has all the woke jobs.
All the woke jobs. You know what I mean? You should be teaching Jamaican American Studies too. But yeah, David and his co-author, Shinhee, their book, Racial Melancholia, Racial Dissociation, is a collection of case histories and commentaries about Asian American college students that David and Shinhee have encountered in their work. Because Asian American college students, they say, have a particular set of anxieties and concerns.
Not dissimilar to the dilemma that Amy brings up here in her letter to Code Switch.
And so in their work, David and Shinhee are addressing those anxieties sociologically and psychologically.
I do the structural critique, she tends to the symptoms.
All right, so racial melancholia and racial dissociation. Let's get into those two things.
Yeah, it's a little wonky sounding. We're going to explain
So much longer.
for me too, because I'm like, what?
Let's go for a little while.
David said that way back in 1917, Sigmund Freud wrote this essay in reaction to World War I. It was called Mourning and Melancholia. Freud said that there's this thing called mourning.
Mourning, which is normal. You lose something, lose a boyfriend, lose a girlfriend, lose a parent. You mourn it, you get over it, you move on.
But there's this other thing called melancholia.
Melancholia for him is never ending. It's, for him, pathological, and it's a mourning without end.
And so, 2 decades ago, David and Shinhee coined this idea they called racial melancholia. It's about this ongoing mourning as it comes to identity.
Processes like immigration and assimilation, which are never complete, they put immigrants and Asian Americans along a continuum where they can never quite mourn or get over the losses of homeland, of language, of culture.
So this is what I've been suffering with my entire life. There's a word for it. There's 2 words for it. Racial melancholia. I want to say it with a Spanish accent. What about racial dissociation?
So dissociation is when people are having experiences that don't line up with the way they're explaining those experiences themselves. So if you're having an experience that is racialized, but you don't have the vocabulary to talk about that experience being about race or racism, or you don't believe that experience is about race or racism, you get caught up in this weird bind. David calls this the conundrum of colorblindness.
And you already see this with Amy in her first paragraph of the letter she sent you. She says that she has internalized racism, and that's part of the reason why she didn't really have many friends in high school who were Asian American. And then she says they were very difficult friendships, but they weren't due to race. So it's a strange contradiction.
Amy didn't tell us what made the few friendships she had with other Asian American kids so tough.
But also she said that her white friends were her tormentors.
Right.
So clearly she can handle difficult relationships.
Exactly.
When she says my friends were also my bullies, that part really kind of broke my heart. Because if you really consider someone a good friend, they should not be your bullies.
And the bind she says that she's isolated herself from all the brown people who might be able to validate the way she feels about all this stuff.
When she talks to her white friends, they have no idea what she's talking about, and they talk over her. And when she talks about race and her experiences, they disbelieve it. And then when she talks to her friends of color, they seem too radical for her. And again, that is the contradiction.
And just to zoom out a little bit more, David said that to understand what Amy is going through specifically, we have to zoom out to the larger context of Asian American folks in American life. David says that Asian American folks have toggled between inclusion and exclusion as model minorities. And it's a very complicated history, but the thing about model minority status that we should remember is that it is entirely provisional. You can be, a non-black person of color. You might be allowed some proximity to whiteness, as long as you don't shake a table or point out the problems with that arrangement. And that's true in the macro sense, in the larger societal sense. But you can see up close how it plays out for somebody like Amy.
This idea of Amy being able to align with her white friends, to be an honorary white, to be a model minority, to be adjunct to whiteness, that is a long, long history.
And real quick, David pointed out that the doctrine of colorblindness, that race doesn't matter, that we should talk about it, blah, 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 that really set in the 1990s, about a generation or so out from the civil rights movement, right? And it meant that a lot of younger people who grew up after that time.
First, there was Greece, where they invented democracy and philosophy. Then came the Roman Empire, until it eventually fell and Europe went into the Dark Ages. Until the Renaissance, when people like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo basically painted and wrote Europe's way out of ignorance. I was told that this is what began the process of the world moving to the age of science and secularism. And the main characters in this story were almost always white European men. While this tale is partially true, it leaves out a lot of details that might have made that kid version of me and you think differently about what we call the Western world. The truth is that between 900 and 1300, most of the world's learning and scholarship was happening in places like Baghdad, Cairo, Timbuktu, and Cordoba. In those cities existed vast libraries and schools that people traveled to from all over the world to study and practice medicine, astronomy, philosophy, mathematics. The people of Islamic lands created a canon of medicine that was used in Europe until the 1800s. They developed algebra and even invented the first corrective lenses. It was the golden age of Islam, and that's where we're going to go in this episode, to meet a Spanish Muslim thinker whose story shows us just how much Islamic philosophy influenced the shaping of what we now call the Western world.
So this is Igor from Kigali, Rwanda, and you're listening to True Line from NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Capital One. Welcome to Banking Reimagined. Capital One checking and savings accounts have no fees or minimums and a top-rated banking app that lets you manage your money anytime, anywhere. Check on the account balance, deposit checks, pay bills, and transfer money on the go. This is Banking Reimagined. What's in your wallet? Capital One NA, member FDIC.
Friends. How many of us have them? So if you're lucky, you have friendships that are affirming and that are like a place for you to be a fuller version of yourself. So why is it that so few of us have friends of different races? Listen now on the Code Switch podcast from NPR.
We're going to start this story by discussing a painting. Not just any painting. It's one of the most famous of the Renaissance period in Europe. It's called The School of Athens, and it's by the artist Raphael. It's colorful and bold, and depicts all the great philosophers who influenced the thinkers of the Renaissance.
At the center of the image are Plato and Aristotle striding forward.
And then fanning out somewhat behind them in the wings are a whole host of minor philosophical figures, and one can go through and identify who these folk are in various ways. Socrates, Pythagoras, Euclid, Ptolemy.
Wow,
They're all depicted as respect. They're white men dressed in European robes. But then, just beneath them, in the bottom left portion of the painting, is someone who immediately sticks out. He's dark-skinned, with a green robe and a yellow turban and a big mustache. He's looking over the shoulder of someone who's writing in a book. His hand is pressed against his chest in a mix of veneration and awe.
His name is Abu al-Walid Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Rushd, or as he came to be known in the West,
Averroes. So Averroes is a figure of the 12th century, living at a time at which Islam had already expanded incredibly from its beginnings on the Saudi Peninsula. In just a few hundred years, the Islamic world spread all the way east of India and west to the Iberian Peninsula in Europe. Islam was the dominant cultural force over a lot of the world at that point. Averroes was born in 1126 in Cordoba, a city in what we today call Spain. By the time he was born, Spain had been ruled by an Islamic caliphate for hundreds of years. Today it's easy to imagine him as a Middle Eastern man, but really, he was just an ordinary European. It's just that at this time, Europe was not entirely a Christian continent. This is Robert Pasnow. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Robert explained that southern Spain at that time was an extreme